Can you imagine offering your home, with all the love in your heart, to celebrate your granddaughter's birthday, only to be met with a cold smile and the words, "We already celebrated without you"? That is exactly what happened to me. In a single second, I felt like life was ripping my heart out, that all my sacrifices had meant nothing. But that wound, which seemed impossible to heal, became the doorway to my transformation. Because what began as the deepest humiliation ended up being the moment I learned to say, "Enough." When I heard those words, I felt the floor beneath my feet slip away like a wet tile. "We already celebrated without you." The sentence just hung in the air, stealing my breath. My smile, the one I had ready for my granddaughter, just shattered on my face. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, just a sigh that tasted like shame. I just wanted to offer my house, my flowers, my patio with the string lights. I just wanted to see her little eyes in front of the cake. Special people. Special people. The phrase bounced around in my head like a locked door. And me? What drawer had they left me in? My daughter-in-law looked at me with that cold smile that never reaches the eyes, as if this were all just a formality. My son stood beside her, rigid, his gaze fixed on the floor, complicit in a silence that hurt more than a scream. I felt my throat tighten, as if I were being cinched with a rope. I had the keys in my purse, ready to say, "My house is your house," but the door was already closed before I even knocked. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to argue. I wanted to cry. I swallowed it all, like someone swallowing a glass of water filled with nails, and inside, something began to break. I pictured the white tablecloth spread out, the gold balloons, the smell of vanilla from the cake I was planning to order. In my closet, my navy blue dress was waiting, and those shoes that made me feel light, all of it suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. The phone in my hand felt like a damp stone, pulling me toward the ground. When did I stop being welcome? When did I go from being family to being a burden? Special people, I repeated softly, as if saying it again would help me understand the cruel joke. I did not laugh. My son looked up for just a second, and in that second, I saw him as a little boy, like when I used to patch up his scraped knees. Then he looked back down, and that gesture tore through my chest. I felt my name fall from his mouth before he could even say it. No one said, "I'm sorry, Mom." No one said, "We'll talk later." I just stood there, like a misplaced decoration in someone else's living room. My hands searched for something to hold on to and only found air. Shame burned the back of my neck. I realized no one was going to lift a finger for me. I am not a woman in need, thank God, and a lifetime of work. I have my house, my savings, my simple pleasures, my morning coffee, my plants, my underlined books. I opened my door so many times to save their day when they were short on the rent, when the girl got sick, when the fridge broke down. I lent them my car. I lent them my dining room. I lent them my arms. I was their bank, their nurse, their chauffeur, their nanny. And today, what was I? A shadow left out of the picture. Special people. What an ugly irony. I didn't want to make a scene on the quiet suburban street where everyone knows everyone else's business. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder and fixed my hair like someone straightening a crown no one can see. I walked slowly, measuring my steps so my knees wouldn't tremble. My eyes felt hot, but I didn't let myself cry there. I held back my tears like you hold back a dollar bill no one is supposed to see. Every step was a reminder. I was not wanted there. Dignity, I thought, is the last dress I must not stain. On the corner, the ice cream truck was playing its jingle, and some kids ran by with blue-stained mouths. I sat on my usual park bench, the one that gets shade in the mid-afternoon. I took out a cloth handkerchief, the one with little flowers, and wiped away the sweat that had already turned to tears. I closed my eyes and saw my granddaughter blowing out candles in another living room with different music, with different applause. No one told me what time. No one sent me a picture. Special people. The word hammered at me again. Could it be that I, the one who was always there, was never special? I took a deep breath and counted to 10, just like my mother taught me, for when the anger rises. I opened my phone and typed a message that I deleted 3 times. Son, that hurt. Delete. Son, explain this to me. Delete. Son, do not disrespect me like this. Delete. I did not want to beg. I did not want to plead for a place that I myself had helped build. I, who have a room in my house filled with toys for her. I, who keep her drawings on my refrigerator. When did I become the uncomfortable guest? I put the phone away. I put the wounded pride away. I put it all away. For now. I returned home when the sun was already painting the windows orange. I opened my door, and the smell of jasmine from the patio greeted me like an old friend. On the table, the ribbons and little candles I had bought, just in case, were still sitting there. I touched them gently, as if they were fragile memories of a future that never happened. I put water on for coffee. I needed the ritual that grounds my soul. The first sip tasted like silence. And in that silence, I asked myself, for the first time, if they truly needed my love, or just my resources. I went to the room with the picture frames, where I have the photos arranged by year, by Christmases, by birthdays. There he is, little, with rosy cheeks, looking at me as if I were his entire world. There I am, young, tired, but happy, with dark circles of love and warm cookies. I spoke to the photos as if lighting a prayer candle. I don't understand where I failed. My chin trembled, and still, I smiled at that woman from the past. She knew how to get back up. I do too, I thought. But first, I had to get through the earthquake. I lay down on the sofa for a moment and stared at the ceiling, counting cracks like stars. Suddenly, the house seemed too big, too quiet. The echo of special people bounced off the walls like a lost bat. I closed my eyes and clenched my fists under the blanket. I was not going to beg for affection. Not at my age, not after everything I have given. But I was not going to let them erase me like this, either. There was something I had to understand. Something that had to change. How? I did not know yet. When I finally got up, I straightened the tablecloth, put away the candles, and patiently folded the ribbons. I made space in the closet for the blue dress, like someone saving a story for another chapter. I lit a candle in front of my little statue of Mary and spoke softly to her, with respect and with contained rage. I asked her for clarity, so I would not act out of resentment, but out of dignity. I asked her for strength, so I would not give in to the first tantrum. Above all, I asked her not to let me forget who I am. I am not leftovers at anyone's table. I barely slept that night. The hours stretched like chewing gum, sticky, uncomfortable. I got up, went to the kitchen, and wrote what I was feeling in a notebook, because words weigh less when they are written down. In one column, I put everything I have given: rent, medicine, diapers, groceries, repairs, parties, school tuition. In another column, I put what they have given me: silence, demands, canceled plans. It is not that one expects to be paid back for love, but the imbalance burns. As the sun came up, I poured another coffee and looked out at my patio as if looking at a map before a journey. I did not want revenge. I wanted respect. I did not want to fight over a cake. I wanted my name to carry weight where it is supposed to carry weight. I repeated it to myself in a low voice, so I would not forget. I am not the ATM. I am the mother. And as I said it, something settled inside me. I put on a light sweater, pulled my hair into a high bun, and took a deep breath. It still hurt, yes, but I was no longer hunched over from it. The day brought its own announcement. I just did not know that announcement would come in the form of knocks on my door. 3 short, quick knocks, as if they were in a hurry. My heart jumped, because a part of me still wanted it to be an embrace. I opened the door and saw them there, with tired faces and urgent eyes. They were in a hurry. They had excuses. They had that look of you always fix things. And I, with my hand on the doorframe, held myself steady, refusing to give in to habit. Because after we already celebrated without you, there was something I needed to say. But first, I had to hear what they had come to ask me for. The silence. That damned silence. When my daughter-in-law told me they had already had the party without me, what tore me apart was not her words, but my son's stillness. That silence that stretches, that weighs, that cuts the air more than an insult. I wanted to hear a, "Mom, it's not what you think," "We'll call you later," anything. But no. His mouth shut like a locked door, and I felt that key bury itself in my chest. Silence hurts, because it confirms what words deny. He did not defend me. He did not raise his voice. He did not say, "She is my mother. Respect her." He just stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, as if the tiles were more interesting than my pain. And I saw him. I saw him with the same eyes that watched him be born. I watched him grow. I watched him become a man. But that afternoon he seemed like a stranger. I felt an invisible wall rise between us, made of shame and cowardice, and every brick of that wall separated me further from him. I wanted to call him by his name, like when he was a boy and used to hide behind me, but my voice broke before it could escape. I had a knot in my throat that tightened like a rope. The silence was not just his, it was mine too. I stayed quiet because I did not want to beg. I did not want my shame to become a spectacle. That shared silence was a tomb where we unintentionally buried years of closeness. And that tomb, in that instant, weighed on my back as if I were carrying a casket. I remembered other times when he asked me for help, and I never hesitated to give him everything. When he lost his job, when his daughter was born, when they did not even have money for macaroni and cheese. I spoke, I advised, I solved it. I never left him in silence. I never abandoned him to his problems. And now, he could abandon me in that void, in that wordless corner where only humiliation remained. The injustice stuck in my throat like a thorn. It was not just what they said, it was what he chose not to say. They say silence is golden, but that afternoon, it was cruel. Every second, without words, was an invisible blow, as if I were being slapped without being touched. The silence screamed at me. "You do not matter. You do not count. You are not part of this." I saw myself standing there, my purse dangling from my shoulder, as motionless as an old painting hanging on a wall nobody looks at. The silence was the empty room, the absence of music, the echo of a laugh that never came. It was the dull knife that still cuts, that still bleeds. The worst part is that it did not just hurt me as a mother, but as a woman. I felt like I was being erased, as if I no longer had a voice or a place. And I have always had a voice, always had strength. I was always the one who held everyone up when the storm hit. That day, I understood they had left me out not just of a party, but of their lives. And that my son had chosen silence, because being quiet was easier than confronting his wife, easier than defending me, easier than recognizing my value. As they turned their backs on me with their silence, I heard a roar of memories inside me. I saw myself waking up at 5 in the morning to make breakfast, rushing to work, coming home to help him with his homework, taking him to the doctor in the middle of the night. I did all of it without expecting anything in return, only with a mother's love. And now, this was the payment. Silence. A silence that buried every sacrifice as if it had never existed, as if everything had been erased with a single stroke. When I finally turned and walked toward the door, that silence followed me like a shadow. I did not hear a, "Wait." I did not hear a, "Come on, Mom." I only heard the creak of the wood as it closed behind me. That sound was louder than any word they could have said. It was the echo of a decision. They had chosen their comfort over my presence. And the silence was the seal that confirmed the sentence. I reached the street, my throat burning. The hot air filled my lungs like fire. I closed my eyes, and for an instant, I thought that maybe I had done something wrong, that maybe I was the one exaggerating, the one expecting too much. But no, I repeated to myself in a low voice, "This is not fair. This is not fair." The silence was not a misunderstanding. It was not an accident. It was a choice. And accepting that tore my soul apart, but it also opened my eyes. That day, I understood that silence also speaks, and sometimes it says what no one dares to confess. My son did not defend me because, in his world, he had learned to take advantage of me, because he knew I would always be there. His silence was not out of shame. It was out of convenience. And that discovery chilled my blood, because what mother can stand her own son, using her as currency? What heart can endure being silenced by its own family? That night, in my bed, I replayed that scene over and over, like rewinding an old tape. My son's silence, my daughter-in-law's smile, the cursed phrase, "We already celebrated without you." I covered my mouth with the pillow so the neighbors would not hear my sobs. I cried in silence the irony of life. I cried with rage, with helplessness, with fear. And in every tear, the same thought repeated. He did not defend me. He said nothing. He left me alone. The silence was my sentence. And yet, even through the weeping, something different began to burn inside me. Because I understood that if they were going to be silent, I could no longer stay silent. The silence was suffocating me. It was killing me from the inside. And a quiet, timid, but firm voice whispered from deep within me. Carol, enough. That voice was mine. That voice had been asleep for years. And although it was still trembling, I promised myself that one day it would wake up completely. That night, when I closed the door to my house, the memories fell on me like wet bricks. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee cup still warm, and began to review everything I had done for them. An infinite list paraded through my head. The rent I paid month after month, the times I filled their refrigerator when it was empty, the furniture I bought so they would have somewhere to sit. Every memory was like a receipt nailed to my heart, proof of a love that was always about giving. I remembered the first time they asked me for help. Mom, we're getting evicted. Without thinking twice, I took out my savings and paid the $500 they needed. I did it 3, 4, 5 more times, until that amount became routine. And I did not mind, because seeing them stable was my reward. Now, as I recounted those stories in my mind, I understood they had not been favors. They had become a habit. They learned to ask me, and I learned to give. And today, not even a thank you remained. I also saw myself walking into the grocery store with my daughter-in-law's list in my hand. Milk, diapers, rice, meat, cookies for the girl. I would fill the cart, and then I would fill the refrigerator in their house, while they gave me a quick smile and left. And I would stay there, my heart full of pride, thinking I had fulfilled my role as a mother and grandmother. But now it hurt to realize that, perhaps, to them, I was never more than a walking pantry. I thought about the living room furniture, the same room where they celebrated my granddaughter without me. I paid for the sofa, the coffee table too. The curtains hanging behind it were my gift one Christmas. Everything in that house had my fingerprints on it, my sacrifices, my love turned into objects. And still, they closed the door on me. It was as if they had invited me to a banquet prepared in my own kitchen and then left me outside, smelling the food through the window. It was not just material things. I remembered the times I watched my granddaughter when they were exhausted, the nights I spent with her in my arms, rocking her, singing her the songs my own mother sang to me. Those moments were mine and hers, and yet they erased them with one stroke by leaving me out of her birthday. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every hug given in silence, it all seemed to vanish in the face of one cruel sentence. We already celebrated without you. The memories weighed so heavily on me that I had to rest my forehead on the table. It was like carrying a sack full of stones that I never set down. Years of being their pillar, of supporting them without asking for anything in return, had turned me into just another piece of furniture. Useful, necessary, but invisible. And as I relived each memory, I understood that the problem had not started that day at that party. The problem had been simmering for years, and I, unintentionally, had fed it with every silent sacrifice. I saw my son as a child, with his torn school uniform, and me, sewing it by hand so he would not feel less than anyone else. I saw him as a rebellious teenager, screaming at me, "You don't understand me." And I stayed quiet, letting him vent against me because I knew he had no one else. I saw him as an adult, failing at his first job, and me, pawning my gold chain so he could get back on his feet. Every memory was a mirror showing me how much I had given and how little I had received in return. It was not that I expected money. It was not that I expected gifts. The only thing I asked for was respect, a place in their lives. A mom, you are important. And yet, what I received was indifference, manipulation, and demands. I remembered how my daughter-in-law would tell me, "Well, you have more. That's why you have to help." As if my years of work, of sleepless nights, of sacrifices, were an eternal obligation to them, and I accepted it, convinced that this was what it meant to be a mother. But that night, I realized that no, that was letting them bleed me dry. Every memory became a knife. I remembered the times I postponed my own dreams to finance theirs. That trip I always wanted to take, canceled to pay for the girls' private school registration. That new armchair I was excited about, forgotten because they needed a better car. And now, I was not even invited to the party that I myself would have ended up paying for. The pain burned in my chest like a slow fire that water cannot put out. I asked myself when I got lost, at what point did I go from being a mother to being an ATM? From being a woman to being a shadow? I closed my eyes and reviewed all those times I swallowed my anger, thinking that love could endure anything. But that night, I understood that love is not about enduring humiliation. Love should not hurt like this. And my memories, far from comforting me, showed me the invisible chain that kept me tied to their abuse. The list of everything I had given became endless. Rent, $500 for 36 months. Groceries, countless. Medicine, every prescription covered. Parties, furniture, gas, repairs. It all added up to more than any calculator could show. But the most expensive thing, the most valuable, was what I was never going to get back. My years, my strength, my hopes. And there, I understood that I had given away parts of myself without even realizing it. And the worst part was, they took it for granted. I stared at that list written in my notebook, and a different kind of anger began to grow. Because memories are heavy, yes, but they also wake you up. And the more I reviewed what I had given, the clearer it became that I could not go on like this. That day, I had not just lost a party. I had lost what little respect I had left in their eyes. And the question that kept spinning in my head was, what was I going to do with all this weight? Because carrying it alone was no longer an option. Only a few days had passed since that humiliation, while I was still licking my wounds, and they knocked on my door. It was my son. I recognized the knock, fast and hard, the one he always used when he was in a hurry. I opened it, my heart torn between resentment and hope. And there he was, his eyes bright, as if he wanted to ask for a hug. But no. On his lips there was no apology. There was a request. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said, and my stomach clenched because I already knew that tone. He sat at my table, the same one where I had written the list of everything I had given, and started talking about a car. "We just really need it, Mom. For the girl, to get around, for work." I looked at him and could hardly believe it. The wound from the party was still wide open, and he was already asking me for money. He spoke like someone negotiating in a store, with figures, with monthly payments, with the certainty that I was going to give in. And every word he spoke was like salt in my fresh wound. He did not mention the party. He did not mention my pain. Not one "I'm sorry for what happened." Not one explanation. Nothing. His emergency was this car, this supposed symbol of stability that, according to him, was going to fix his life. I listened to him, and I felt my heart hardening like stone. Because he was not talking to me as a son to a mother, he was talking to me as a debtor to a lender, as a customer to a teller. And I did not know whether to laugh at the irony or cry from helplessness. I wanted to ask him out loud, "And me? Who pays for my tears? Who gives me back the lost party?" But I did not say it. I kept silent, the same silence they had given me days before. I looked at him calmly, though I was boiling inside. And I repeated to myself, over and over, "This cannot be happening. This cannot be happening." Because it was unbelievable that after erasing my name from the party, he would come to my house to ask me for more. His words bounced in my head. "We need it, Mom. It's for the family." Family. That word he used like a magic key to open my heart and empty my pockets. Family. I, who had carried that family on my shoulders so many times. I, who had been the mattress every time they fell. And now he threw it in my face as an excuse, as blackmail disguised as love. That word, which should bring warmth, sounded cold to me, hollow, self-serving. The worst part was that, as he spoke, I watched him and recognized his gestures. Those gestures that were once tender were now manipulation. The way he tilted his head, the way he smiled shyly, as if asking for pity. It was a well-rehearsed play, a role he had learned to perform since he was young. And I had been the most naive spectator, the one who always applauded at the end and took out her wallet as a reward. He talked, and I barely heard him. My mind was somewhere else on the park bench, with the stored photos, in the notebook with my list of sacrifices. Everything screamed at me that this was the same pattern as always. First the wound, then the request. First the contempt, then the demand. It was a cycle, a vicious circle from which I never escaped, and the question burned on my lips. Until when? I did not interrupt him. I let him finish because I wanted to hear everything, every word, every excuse. When he finally fell silent, he looked at me with those eyes that always knew how to soften me. So, what do you say, Mom? And I felt that Mom was a costume, because he only called me that when he wanted something. The rest of the time, I was invisible. That Mom sounded fake, hollow, like a counterfeit coin that shines but has no value. I took a deep breath, trying not to break. I looked him in the eyes, and what I saw broke my soul. There was no remorse. There was expectation. There was no affection. There was calculation. He was not asking me for a favor. He was taking me for granted, as if the money were already his, as if I had no right to refuse. And I understood, with a dull blow to the chest, that he had not come to ask me. He had come to collect what he believed he was owed. It hurt more than I want to admit, because it was not the money. It never was. It was realizing that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as a resource. And in that moment, as he waited for my answer, I felt I was facing a stranger. The boy I raised was no longer there. In his place was a man who was comfortable abusing me, and I, with my hands trembling on the table, had to decide if I was going to continue being his bank or his mother in truth. The words got stuck in my throat. I looked at him, opened my mouth, but only a sigh came out. I did not want to say yes, but I could not find the strength to say no. I was trapped between the fear of losing him and the certainty of continuing to lose myself if I gave in again. And at that crossroads, the only thing I could do was stay quiet, as if I were gathering all the strength that had been torn from me over the last few years. When he left, with no clear answer, the house fell silent. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, as if my legs could no longer support me. I knew that moment had been decisive, that life was pushing me to break a cycle. But I also knew I was not ready yet, and as I listened to his footsteps fading away, I felt that the real battle was just beginning. That night, I could not take it anymore. I felt the walls of my house closing in on me as if they were squeezing my chest. I had remained silent in front of my son, but inside I was screaming. And then I did something I almost never do. I called my lifelong friend, Brenda. Her voice on the line was like a balm, and as soon as she asked, "What's wrong, honey?" the tears burst out of me. I could not stop them. The rage and sadness exploded all at once, like water breaking a dam. I told her everything. The party without me, my daughter-in-law's cruel phrase, my son's cowardly silence, and the new request for the car. As I spoke, I felt every word tearing me apart a little more, but I also felt relief, because I was finally letting out what had been burning me inside. "They erased me, Brenda," I said, my voice broken. "They erased me as if I didn't exist, and on top of it, they want me to keep paying for their whims." And saying it out loud made the humiliation even more real. She did not interrupt me, she just listened. Her silence was different from my son's. Brenda's silence did not hurt. It kept me company. Until, finally, she spoke. "Carol, they are using you. They are stealing your dignity." Her words hit me hard. I was expecting comfort, and it'll be okay, but no. She gave me the truth, no anesthetic. And although it hurt to hear it, her voice was the only thing giving me clarity. "But he's my son," I said, as if that were excuse enough for everything. "He's my blood, my life. I raised him." And my friend, with that wisdom that comes from age, answered, "Yes, but he is also a man who learned to take advantage of you, and you taught him that you will always be there. He doesn't ask anymore, Carol. He demands. And you don't know how to say no." I felt as if a veil had been ripped from my eyes, because yes, she was right. I never told him no, and that mistake was costing me my life. I saw myself reflected in her words. a mother who confuses love with eternal sacrifice, a woman who believes that giving everything is the only way to be loved. And there, between sobs, I understood that I had created a monster without realizing it. A son who no longer saw boundaries, who no longer distinguished between gratitude and entitlement. My tears rolled, hot and bitter, because I was accepting the truth I never wanted to admit. My love, given incorrectly, had become a chain. Brenda asked me to breathe, to let it out, and I cried like I had not cried in years. I cried for the lost party, for the blue dress hanging in the closet, for the candles I never lit. I cried for every dollar bill I handed over without thinking, for every sleepless night, for every hug I gave in exchange for indifference. They were tears of rage, of accumulated frustration, of exhaustion, tears that smelled of resignation, but also of an awakening. "Honey, listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "You don't beg for love, and you were not born to be used. You are a woman, you are a mother, you are the owner of your life. And if you keep on like this, you're going to burn out like a candle in the wind." Her words pierced me. I felt a warmth in my chest, a mix of pain and courage. No one had ever spoken to me so clearly. No one had ever told me that my dignity was worth as much as my love. And I, through my tears, knew that something had to change. I hung up the phone, my eyes red and my heart pounding. I walked through my house like a lost soul, touching the furniture, the photos, the memories. Every object spoke to me of all I had given. But Brenda's words echoed louder. "They are stealing your dignity." That phrase became an echo that followed me into every corner, and though it hurt, it also gave me strength. Because for the first time, it no longer sounded like an insult, but like a warning. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror and barely recognized myself. I saw a tired woman with swollen eyes, with her back hunched from carrying so much. But I also saw someone who could still get back up. "You are the owner of your life," I repeated in a low voice, like a mantra. I ran my hands through my hair, dried my tears, and felt a tiny spark inside me. A spark that demanded justice. A spark that demanded I wake up. That night, I slept little, but what little I slept was different. I did not dream of parties or debts. I dreamed of freedom, of respect, of a table where my voice actually counted. I woke up with swollen eyes, but with a lighter soul. I was no longer just the victim of contempt. Now, I was a woman who had begun to see clearly. And clarity, even when it hurts, is the first step toward strength. During breakfast, I went over Brenda's words again. "You don't know how to say no." That phrase stung me like a wasp, because it was true. I never knew how to say no. Never. Not when I couldn't. Not when I was tired. Not when it hurt me. And I understood that my silence and my sacrifices had been the gasoline for their abuse. My son was not the only one to blame. I too had allowed too much, and that truth, hard as stone, made me swallow with anger and shame. When I finished my coffee, I closed my eyes and made myself a silent promise. I am going to learn to say no, even if my voice trembles, even if it hurts me, even if I feel like I am losing him. I am going to say no, because I understood that loving was not about giving everything without measure. Loving was also about setting boundaries, and as I clutched the mug in my hands, I knew my life was about to take a turn. I did not know how or when yet, but that day I planted the seed of my courage. That afternoon, I shut myself in my room, pulled the curtains, and let the dim light embrace me. The silence was no longer an enemy, it was a witness. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped, my heart beating like a drum. I had cried so much the night before that I felt dry, but in that dryness, something new appeared. Courage. It was not a courage that shouts, it was one that settles in your bones and gives you firmness, and right then I knew I could not stay the same. I took a deep breath and thought about everything I had heard from Brenda. Her words echoed in my head. "They are stealing your dignity." I repeated them to myself in a low voice, over and over, until they stopped stinging like a whip and started to sound like a command. I looked in the mirror and spoke to myself as I never had before. "Carol, enough. Enough of being quiet. Enough of giving without receiving. Enough of begging for respect." That voice was weak, trembling, But it was mine. It was my beginning. I opened my closet and saw the navy blue dress hanging there, the one I had bought for the party. I stroked it with my fingers and felt the cool fabric. It was beautiful, but in that moment, I saw it differently. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a reminder of my strength. I did not wear it for that party, but I would wear it for another occasion. An occasion where I did not have to plead for a place. An occasion where I myself would be the host of my own dignity. I walked through the house as if touring a temple. I touched the furniture, the walls, the decorations I had bought with my own hands. And I told myself, I achieved all of this alone. No one gave it to me. No one has the right to make me feel small. Every object was proof of my effort, of my silent struggle. And suddenly, I understood. I was not the one who needed my son. They were the ones who had always needed me. That truth struck me like a bolt of clarity. I sat down to write a letter, not to them, but to myself. In that letter, I promised myself things I had never promised before. To not give more than what hurts me. To not stay silent when I am in pain. To not accept crumbs disguised as affection. I wrote with a trembling but firm hand, as if every word were a brick returning the ground beneath my feet. When I finished, I folded the page and put it in my nightstand drawer, like a secret pact with my own soul. I remembered my mother, a tough woman, who always used to say, "Dignity is the only thing you don't pawn." I had forgotten that. I had buried it under tons of sacrifices. And that afternoon, her words returned like an echo. I felt her with me, scolding me with love, pushing me to wake up. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel alone. I felt a line of strong women behind me, reminding me that I was one of them. I decided something simple, but huge. The next time they asked me for money, I was going to say no. It did not matter if it was for a car, for the rent, or for bread. No. That small word I had never known how to pronounce would be my shield. I was scared. Of course I was. I thought of my son's face, his silence, his accusations, but I was more scared of continuing to lose myself. And between those two fears, I chose the braver one. That night, I lit a candle in front of my little statue of Mary. I knelt and cried softly, but not from helplessness, from liberation. I asked for strength to follow through on my decision, because I knew it would not be easy. I asked for clarity so I would not fall into the same game again. I asked for peace to accept whatever came, my son's distance, my daughter-in-law's fury, even loneliness, because all of that hurt less than continuing to be invisible in their lives. I slept with the light of the candle burning, as if I had company. And in my dreams, for the first time in a long time, I was not crying. I was standing tall, head held high, saying no without fear. I woke up with my heart racing, but with a faint smile on my lips. I knew the road was just beginning, that the tests would come, but I also knew I was no longer the same. Something in me had changed forever. The next day, I made myself a stronger coffee than usual, as if I needed extra energy to face the day. As I drank it, I mentally rehearsed my decision. I pictured the scene. I pictured their faces. I pictured the moment I would say that magic word. No. It was a silent rehearsal, but a powerful one. And with every sip I repeated, "You can do this, Carol. You can do this." I went out to the patio and let the morning sun embrace me. The fresh air filled me with life, and I felt that nature itself was telling me I was not alone. My plants, my flowers, my jasmine, everything reminded me that life goes on, that there are always new buds even if the branches are cut. And there, amid the smell of damp earth and the sound of birds, I confirmed my decision. No more humiliation, no more imposed silence. My voice was going to be heard again. As I closed the door to go run my errands, I saw the reflection of the still burning candle on the floor. That reflection stayed with me like an invisible beacon. And deep down, I knew the test would come soon, that they would not wait long to ask me for something again. The difference was that now I was ready to face their anger, their blackmail, their disappointment, because I had discovered something they could not take from me, the courage to say enough. Only a few days passed when the opportunity arrived on its own. My son knocked on my door again, this time with my granddaughter by the hand. The little one ran to me with that innocence that does not yet understand arguments or silence, and my heart melted seeing her. "Mom, we need you to help us again," he said, with the same old tone. But I was no longer the same. Something inside me had strengthened, and instead of reaching for my wallet, I reached into my nightstand drawer for the letter I had written in secret. I sat down across from him with the girl in my arms and said slowly, "I don't have money to give you today." I saw his eyes widen, incredulous, as if that short word, "no," was impossible to hear from my lips. Before he could speak, I placed the letter on the table. "This I do have, and it's for your daughter." He looked at it, confused, and the girl, curious, took the envelope in her little hands. That letter was my gift, the one nobody expected, not him, not her. In the letter, I wrote to my granddaughter with an open heart. I told her how I waited for her before she was born, how I held her in my arms the first time, how her laughter brought me youth again. I told her about my house, my flowers, my favorite songs. I wrote that she will always have a place here, that my love does not depend on parties or invitations. That letter had no price tag, but it was worth more than any dollar bill. It was the testament of my true love. My son did not know what to say. His mouth opened and closed several times, as if searching for a response he could not find. "But Mom, the money," he murmured. I interrupted him for the first time in many years. "Money gets spent and forgotten. This letter will stay with her forever." I looked him directly in the eyes, and I felt that gaze disarm him more than any lecture, because for the first time he understood that I was speaking from strength, not from guilt. The girl hugged the letter as if it were a treasure, and that filled me with peace. She does not need new cars or fancy parties. She needs memories. She needs real love. She needs stories to keep her company as she grows up. And I, with that letter, was giving her an inheritance that cannot be stolen, that cannot be pawned, that cannot be bought in any store. It was my way of reclaiming a place in her life, a place that no one else could take from me. My son frowned, uncomfortable. "I don't understand, Mom. What are you trying to accomplish with this?" His tone was a mix of reproach and confusion. I took a deep breath and answered him. "I want you to understand that I am no longer going to give you money in exchange for scraps. I want you to know that my love isn't measured in dollar bills. It's measured in actions, in memory, in respect. And I want your daughter to remember that her grandmother loved her for real, even if you two denied me a place at her party." His hands trembled on the table, and for a second I thought I saw the little boy he once was insecure, confused, needing guidance. But he quickly hid behind the mask of the demanding adult. "I can't believe you're leaving us like this," he said coldly. And I, calmly, replied, "Yes, you can believe it. Because I can't believe you erased me from my granddaughter's life. This is just the beginning of putting things in their proper place." The tension in the room was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. But strangely, I was not afraid. That word I had pronounced, "no," had freed me. I felt my shoulders relax, my chest tighten less. I was not losing, I was recovering. I was not being emptied, I was being filled with dignity. And even if my son did not understand it in that moment, I knew that one day he would remember this as the day his mother stopped being his ATM and started being his mother again. When they left, the girl turned to look at me from the doorway. The letter clutched to her chest. She smiled at me, that sincere smile that does not yet understand adult grudges, and that image sustained me, because I knew that even if they tried to erase me, I had already planted a memory in her heart that was impossible to remove. That smile was my silent victory, my reward in advance. I closed the door calmly, with no tears this time. I leaned against it for a few minutes, feeling the house fill with silence again. But it was no longer a silence of defeat. It was a silence of peace. I walked to the table, where the empty envelope still lay, and stroked the paper as if it were a trophy. That unexpected gift had become my first true act of freedom. That night, as I ate dinner alone, I did not feel loneliness as a punishment. I felt it as my own space, a necessary breath. I put on quiet music, poured myself a little wine, and made a toast to myself. I toasted to having had the courage to give a different kind of gift, to having given myself the possibility of starting over. Dignity tastes like bitter wine, but it also tastes like hope. I went to bed late, my heart serene. I looked at the candle in front of the little statue and thanked her. You gave me strength to say no. You gave me courage to give what truly matters. I closed my eyes with a faint smile, knowing the path was still long, but that I had taken the first step. And in my dreams, I again saw my granddaughter hugging the letter. That image stayed with me like a beacon, reminding me that I still had much to fight for. It was not long before the cruelest blow came. My daughter-in-law, upon finding out what had happened with the letter, came to my house with fury written on her face. She pounded on the door, and when I opened it, she stormed in without asking permission, as if this house, my house, also belonged to her. "How dare you," she said, with a venom in her voice that chilled my blood. She did not speak to me like a mother. She spoke to me like an enemy. That day, I saw contempt in its most open, naked, and hurtful form. She accused me of being selfish, of being old-fashioned, of not understanding what the family needed. "A car is more useful than a ridiculous letter," she yelled, as if my words, written with love, were garbage. I just looked at her, and I felt her screams bouncing off the walls, my house filling with that poison. And what hurt most was that my son was there, behind her, silent again, complicit again. That silence of his was conditioning me again, weighing on me like a tombstone. I wanted to respond with rage, but I held back. I was not going to lower myself to her level. I stared at her, with a calm that seemed to drive her even crazier. "I don't need your letters or your games," she insisted. "If you really loved your granddaughter, you would give us what we asked for." That phrase stuck a thorn in me. How could she dare measure my love with money? How could she believe a car bought more affection than the memories and presence of a grandmother? Her contempt was a mirror. In it, the purest ingratitude was reflected. She called me useless. She told me the only thing I did was get in the way, that her family's decisions did not include me. And that is when I felt the words were no longer daggers, but confirmations. Because what she was saying out loud, my son was endorsing with his silence. I was the leftover, the one who did not fit, the one they could discard without remorse. That open contempt made me cry inside, but it also lit a fire in me, the certainty that I was not going to let them erase me anymore. The scene was so harsh that for a moment, I thought I might faint. I felt my legs weaken, my hands sweat, my throat close up, but I held my ground. Because I understood that this was the moment to prove to myself that I was done yielding. "I am not giving you one more cent," I said, and my voice trembled, but it came out firm. "Do not blackmail me with my granddaughter's love. She already has that love, and it doesn't depend on you." That sentence was my shield, my resistance against her screams. She laughed sarcastically, a laugh that made my skin crawl. "We'll see how long that bravery lasts," she spat, before turning around. And in that instant, my son gave me a fleeting look. His face was torn between discomfort and blind loyalty to his wife. He said nothing, but his eyes confessed everything. He was not going to defend me. He was not going to stop her. Once again, I was alone against this storm. But this time, that loneliness did not make me weak. It made me more resolute. When they left my house, I felt the walls breathe with me. I closed the door slowly, as if closing a painful chapter. I leaned against the wood and let out a long, deep sigh that I had been holding in for years. I did not cry right then. I did not want to give them my tears. I saved the crying for myself, for my pillow, but in the moment, I only allowed myself to feel pride. Because I had held on, I had set boundaries, I had faced their contempt without folding. That night, however, the rage caught up with me. In my room alone, I did cry. I cried for her words, for his cowardice, for the emptiness they were leaving in my soul. But in the midst of the tears, I also smiled, because I understood that my tears were no longer tears of submission, but of purification. I was getting the poison out that they had thrown at me. I was cleaning the wound, so it could heal with dignity. This crying was different. It was healing me. I promised myself I would not forget what happened, because open contempt is like a broken mirror. If you try to glue it back together, the cracks always remain. My relationship with them was never going to be the same, and accepting that hurt, like accepting a death. but it was also the only way to be reborn. Because the woman who stood tall in the face of her daughter-in-law's screams was not the same one who was trembling in silence days before. Something in me had changed forever. The next day, the neighbors greeted me normally, oblivious to the hurricane that had passed through my living room. I smiled out of politeness, but inside, I carried a secret. I was not the same. I walked to the market with my head held high, feeling that every step was a reminder of my courage. I bought flowers, the most beautiful ones, and put them on my table as a symbol of new life. Because after the contempt, I had decided to surround myself with beauty, even if it only came from me. I looked at the letter I had given my granddaughter, and I felt I had made the best decision. Even if they despised me, she already had a piece of me that no one could take away. That letter was my shield against being forgotten, my voice against the silence, my love turned into eternal words. And as I stroked it, I repeated to myself, contempt hurts, but it also reveals. And I have seen what I needed to see. That certainty sustained me. It strengthened me. That night, I lit another candle in front of the little statue and spoke softly. Don't let me weaken. Give me strength to bear this contempt and wisdom to turn it into a lesson. And as the light flickered, I felt a strange peace, as if life itself were telling me the storm was not over, but that I now had firmer roots to withstand it. And with that peace, I went to sleep, with the conviction that the open contempt was only the prelude to a greater truth that was yet to come. The days passed slowly, as if life were giving me a breath to gather my thoughts. I remained firm in my decision, even though the loneliness weighed on my house like a wet coat. And then, as often happens in this life, the wheel turned. One day, I heard from a neighbor that things at my son's house were not going well. The debts had piled up, the bank had repossessed the new car, and the girl was sick with a fever. The world, suddenly, was billing them for every excess. When I got the news, my heart clenched. I will not deny it. A part of me felt sad for my granddaughter, because she was not to blame for any of it. But another part of me, the most tired part, felt that destiny was putting the pieces in their place. It is not that I wished them harm, I would never do that, but it was impossible not to see the justice in it all. As if life were telling them the same thing, I did not dare to shout that you cannot build anything on contempt and ingratitude. One afternoon, they knocked on my door. It was them. My daughter-in-law no longer had that arrogance on her face. Now she had dark circles and eyes red from crying. My son looked sunken, his shoulders slumped, and behind him, my granddaughter, pale, with the envelope from the letter still tucked into her backpack. The scene hit my soul. They were the same people who had despised me, but now they seemed smaller, more vulnerable. And I, from my doorway, felt the weight of deciding how to receive them. "We need your help," my son said, his voice broken. There was no trace of the demanding tone or the usual arrogance. His words dragged, dissolving in the air. I looked at him without answering right away. It was strange. For years I had waited to hear a sincere, "Mom, we need you," and now that I had it in front of me, it did not sound as I had imagined. It sounded like a plea, like a confession of defeat, and that sound both chilled me and softened me at the same time. I did not let them in right away. I stayed in the doorframe, leaning firmly, because I needed them to understand that they no longer entered my house as if they owned it. "Help?" I said. "And where was your help when you left me out of the party? Where was your respect when you treated me like a burden?" My daughter-in-law looked down. My son did not know what to answer, and in that silence, I knew that for the first time, they were acknowledging their faults without disguise. I invited them to sit, but not in the living room. In the dining room, as if marking invisible boundaries. The girl leaned against my arm and looked at me with tired eyes, trusting me without a single word. That gesture is what melted me. Because in the end, she was the only innocent one in all of this, and I knew that for her sake, I had to show firmness, but also compassion. I could not repeat the mistake of giving in blindly, but I also could not turn my back on the one who needed me most. As they told me their problems, I felt like life was speaking to me. My daughter-in-law admitted through tears that they were in debt up to their eyeballs, that they had spent more than they could, that they did not know how to get out. My son confessed he had lost his job and had not known how to handle it. Every word was a brick falling from the wall of arrogance they had built, and I listened in silence, with the calm of someone who no longer needs to shout to be heard. Inside me there was a storm. On one hand, the wound was still fresh. I had not forgotten the we already celebrated without you. I could not erase my daughter-in-law's sarcastic laugh. But on the other hand, my granddaughter was trembling with fever in my arms, and my grandmother's heart pulled me toward compassion. I realized life was testing me. I could choose to repeat the cycle of blind sacrifice, or I could set my conditions with dignity. I took a deep breath and told them what I had never said before. Yes, I will help you, but not like before. Not with money without conditions. Not with sacrifices that erase me. If you want my support, you will have it. But you will have to give something in return. Respect. Without respect, there is nothing. My words came out firm, and in my son's eyes I saw something I had not seen in years. Shame. And that shame was the first step of his transformation. My daughter-in-law cried silently. I did not console her, because I understood those tears were necessary. My son nodded, his head low, and for the first time he did not see me as an ATM, but as a mother. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured. And those 3 words, though weak, sounded sincere. They did not erase years of abuse. They did not heal my wounds instantly. But they were the beginning of a different path. And I, though wary, accepted them. The girl, oblivious to it all, took the letter out of her backpack and put it on the table. "I have the most beautiful gift," she said with a tired smile. And hearing that, my eyes filled with tears. That letter, which they had despised, had become her treasure, her good luck charm. In that instant, I understood that my seed had already sprouted. Whatever happened with her mother and father, I would always live in my granddaughter's memory, and that gave me peace. That night, when they left, I stayed alone in the kitchen, but I did not feel defeated. I felt that life had come full circle, that justice had arrived in the most unexpected way. Not as revenge, but as a lesson. They had tasted the harshness of life, and I had found in my dignity a way to be present without losing myself. The wheel turned, yes, and this time it found me stronger, clearer, and more in charge of myself. That afternoon when they returned, looking for me with tears in their eyes, was the true moment of truth. I looked at them in front of me, more fragile than ever, and I felt that destiny was putting me at a crossroads. For years I had lived for them, given without limits, and swallowed humiliation. Now they were arriving, defeated, imploring, acknowledging without words that they could not do it alone, and right then I understood that the power to decide was no longer in their hands. It was in mine. My son took my hands desperately. "Mom, I'm sorry. Without you, we're nothing," he said, and those words cut through me like a knife, because they were true, but they were also unfair. They could not always depend on me. They could not keep draining my life to sustain theirs. I looked him in the eyes, and what I saw was not just regret, it was fear. Fear of losing me, fear of having nowhere left to run. And that confession hurt me, but it also freed me. I answered him slowly, my voice low but firm. "My love isn't bought with money. If you want your mother, you respect her." I felt those words come from the deepest part of me, like thunder I had been holding back for years. My son lowered his head, and for the first time there was no complicit silence or justification. There was acceptance. I saw the defeat in his shoulders, but also the beginning of something new, the possibility of learning what he never wanted to hear. My daughter-in-law was crying in the corner, as if she had suddenly understood the scale of her mistakes. I did not ask her for forgiveness in words, but her tears were confession enough. I did not hug her, because I was not yet ready to erase everything that had happened. But I did give her a space of silence, a different silence than before. It was not contempt, it was an opportunity, a silence that said, "I am listening to you, but I do not trust you yet." That moment was like looking in a mirror that reflected my entire life. There I was, the woman who had always given more than she had, the mother who confused sacrifice with love, the grandmother who was erased from a party. But there, too, was the new woman, the one who had learned to say enough, the one who understood that love is not begged for, the one who had dared to set boundaries. And for the first time, I recognized myself in that mirror with pride. The air in the living room grew heavy, as if every word was left hanging. I breathed slowly, trying to sort out what I was feeling. One part of me wanted to run and hug them, like always. Another part wanted to close the door and never open it again. But between those extremes, I found a new path. To help without erasing myself, to love without sacrificing myself. And there, in that fragile balance, I knew I had found my truth. I got up and went to get a glass of water for my granddaughter, who still had a fever. When I put my hand on her forehead, she smiled weakly. "Thank you, Grandma," she murmured. Those 2 words were worth more than any adult apology. In that instant, I understood that the true inheritance I could leave her was to teach her, by my example, that dignity and love can go hand in hand, and that no one, not even family, has the right to humiliate you. I sat back down across from them, calmer. "I will support you, but with conditions," I told them. My words surprised them because they were used to my blind devotion. First, respect. Second, responsibility. And third, you will never again treat me as if I am invisible. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of someone who is listening, who knows the decision is no longer theirs, but mine. And that silence, for the first time, made me feel powerful. My son looked up and nodded, tears running down his cheeks. My daughter-in-law also nodded in silence, swallowing her pride. I did not celebrate this surrender because I was not looking for revenge. I was looking for justice. And although I knew that trust is not rebuilt overnight, that was the first brick laid at the foundation of a new relationship. A relationship that, if they wanted it, would have to be built with respect and gratitude. That moment of truth was not just for them, it was for me. Because I understood that I would never again be the woman who stays silent, who hides behind sacrifices, who accepts contempt. I understood that my voice has value, that my dignity is my treasure, and that setting boundaries did not make me less of a mother, it made me more human. And that revelation filled me with a peace I had not felt in years. When they left, my house fell silent. But this time, it was not an empty silence, it was a silence full of meaning. It was the echo of my words reverberating off the walls. If you want your mother, you respect her. That echo stayed with me as I closed the windows and turned off the lights. And for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully with no tears on my pillow because I knew the moment of truth had come and I had faced it standing tall. That night, I dreamed of a different party. There were no balloons or cakes, no gifts or music. It was just me, sitting at a long table, surrounded by peace. And at that table my place was reserved. No one argued it, no one questioned it. That dream was my way of understanding that the respect I had demanded was not a whim. It was my right. And although life still had tests for me, I already knew what my truth was. The days that followed were strange. My house no longer felt so empty because my memories still resonated with the words I had told them. Respect. That word became my border, my lock, my shield. It did not mean that everything was forgiven. It did not mean the wounds had disappeared, but it did mean that I had drawn a line. And although it hurt at first to see the distance in their gestures, deep down, I felt it was necessary. One weekend, my granddaughter came to stay with me. Her little eyes sparkled when she came in, as if my house were a secret refuge that no one could take from her. She cuddled up in my lap and said, "I feel happy here, Grandma." Her words disarmed me because they confirmed what I always knew. She did not need cars, parties, or luxuries, just real love. And I promised myself that even if I had to set boundaries with her parents, I would never set boundaries on the love I have for her. My son left her at the door without coming in. He looked uncomfortable, nervous, like someone who does not know if he still has the right to enter. And I, with a tight heart, greeted him with a sober nod. I did not close the door in his face, but I did not welcome him like before, either. It was a distant greeting, a reminder that trust is not given freely, it is rebuilt. I saw the weight of guilt in his eyes, and though it pained me, I understood that is how it had to be, that he would learn to value what he never took care of. During those days with my granddaughter, I felt my house fill with life again. We cooked together, we watered the plants, we played bingo. She laughed with that pure laugh that made me, for moments, forget all the pain. and I thought that maybe this was God's way of rewarding me by giving me the chance to teach her what her father never understood. That you take care of love, that respect is non-negotiable, that you defend your dignity with your soul. My daughter-in-law did not come by during those days. Her absence was a different kind of silence, one I was grateful for. I knew she was not yet ready to look me in the eye, and I was not ready to fully forgive her either. The open contempt she had thrown at me was still fresh in my memory. But I also knew that time puts everything in its place, and that sooner or later she would have to face the reality that I was no longer going to bend. I was not going to be her fallback, her ATM, or her shadow again. One Sunday afternoon, my son came to pick up the girl. He stood at the door longer than usual, as if looking for the courage to speak. Finally, he did. "Mom, I want to fix things." That phrase hit my heart, because it was what I had always wanted to hear. But I did not receive it with easy tears. I looked him in the eye and answered calmly, "That doesn't just depend on me. If you want things to change, first, you respect me. I am not your enemy, but I am not your bank, either. I am your mother." He lowered his head, as he had so many times before, but this time it was not in guilty silence, but in acknowledgement. "I understand," he murmured. And for the first time, I felt his words were sincere, not a trick to get something. He hugged me, and I hugged him back, but differently. It was not the usual hug, that blind hug of absolute surrender. It was a measured, conscious hug, a hug with boundaries. And in that gesture, I understood that the reconciliation had begun. This reconciliation was not a wipe-the-slate-clean moment. There were no fireworks or long dramatic embraces. It was more like a broken thread being sewn back together, stitch by stitch, with patience and care. I knew the fabric would never be the same, that the scars would remain, but I also knew those scars were witnesses to my transformation. And I preferred a relationship with visible scars over a lie disguised as perfection. My granddaughter, from the corner, watched us with curiosity. "Are you not mad anymore?" she asked innocently. My son and I looked at each other and smiled sadly. "We're learning," I answered her. And in that answer, everything was summarized. We were learning to treat each other with respect, to acknowledge mistakes, to rebuild what had been broken. It was not easy. It was not going to be fast, but it was real. And what is real, even if it hurts, is always worth more than fantasy. Over time, I realized that this reconciliation with boundaries was an act of self-love. I was no longer left with the emptiness of giving everything and receiving contempt. Now, I felt the weight of my own decisions. And that weight, far from burdening me, gave me peace. Because I knew that what I was building was not just for me, but also for my granddaughter, who would one day understand that her grandmother was brave and knew how to say enough. Dignity became my compass. Every time they spoke to me, every time they asked for something, I evaluated. Does this do me good, or does this do me harm? And if it did me harm, I said no. That small word, which was once so difficult, became my salvation. And the most surprising thing was to see that, instead of losing them, I began to win them back in a different way. Because finally, they were looking at me not as an ATM, but as a mother. That was the reconciliation with boundaries. A new beginning, not perfect, but true. A relationship no longer based on demands or blackmail, but on respect and the slow rebuilding of trust. And although shadows still remained, I no longer walked, hunched over beneath them. I walked tall, head held high, knowing that I had recovered the most valuable thing a woman can have, her dignity. The sun came through the window that morning with a different kind of brightness, as if telling me that one chapter had ended and another was just beginning. I got up without that weight in my chest that had accompanied me for years. I walked barefoot through my house and felt every tile supporting me firmly, as if they were celebrating me too. I was no longer the invisible woman begging for a place. I was a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her strength, her dignity. I made coffee and served it in my favorite mug, the one I always saved for special occasions, and I laughed to myself because I understood that special occasions do not depend on parties or invitations. They depend on me. Every sip tasted like freedom, like a decision made, like a silent victory. I looked out the window at my flowers, the jasmine that never stopped blooming, and I understood that life always gives new opportunities if you dare to lift your head. My house, which used to feel empty, now breathed with me. Not because others filled it, but because I had learned to fill it with my own presence. I walked to the closet and touched the navy blue dress. This time, it did not hurt to see it. On the contrary, I felt it was a symbol of everything I had overcome. It was no longer the dress for a lost party, but the dress for my rebirth. I hung it at the very front, waiting for the day I would wear it to celebrate my own life. I lit a candle in front of my little statue of Mary and gave thanks, not because she had spared me from pain that was necessary, but because she gave me the strength to face it. I thanked her for every tear that made me stronger, for every silence that taught me to speak, for every moment of contempt that showed me the path to dignity. And as the flame flickered, I felt my soul also light up with a new, clearer, and more serene light. My granddaughter came to visit me that afternoon. She had the letter in her hands, wrinkled from being opened and read so many times. "Grandma, I read it every night," she told me with a smile that filled my eyes with tears. I understood then that this piece of paper had done more for her than any material gift. The letter was a bridge between us, an indestructible bond that neither contempt nor distance could cut. That was the true gift, the one that secured my place in her heart. I hugged her tightly, feeling her warmth against my chest, and I thought that, in the end, it was all worth it. That every tear, every humiliation, every silence led me to this moment. A moment where I could look at her without fear, without guilt, knowing that she was learning from me not just love, but dignity. And I promised to teach by example, so that she would never allow anyone to make her feel small. My son started to visit, little by little. He no longer came to ask for things. He came to talk, to listen, to share silences that, for the first time, did not hurt. At first, the conversations were short, clumsy, but every word built a new bridge. A fragile bridge, yes, but a real one. I crossed it with care, knowing I was not going to get lost on it again, because now I was doing it from my strength, not from my sacrifice. The reconciliation with him was slow, like sewing a torn garment with a fine needle. Every day was a stitch, every word a thread, every gesture a patch of trust. I did not pretend to erase the past, because scars speak, they teach, they protect. I accepted those scars as medals from my battle, and I understood that it is not about forgetting, but about learning. And what I learned is that without boundaries, love rots. With boundaries, it blossoms. One day, while we were having coffee on the patio, my son told me, "Mom, now I understand everything you did for us." His voice was sincere, without embellishments, without excuses, and I smiled, because that simple sentence was worth more than all the money they had ever asked me for. It was the acknowledgement I had waited years for. It was not a check or a gift. It was respect. And that word, after so long, was the balm that healed the wound. Life did not go back to being perfect. There are always tensions, there are always memories that hurt, but I no longer live hunched over by them. I live upright, head held high, with the certainty that I have given myself back to myself. And every day I wake up, I tell myself, it is never too late to reclaim your place. That phrase became my mantra, my shield against sadness, the compass that guides me forward. The new dawn did not arrive with a shout or with applause. It arrived in silence, softly, like a caress on the cheek. It arrived in the small details. In my granddaughter reading my letter out loud to me, in my son looking at me with respect, in my own voice saying no when it was necessary. That dawn taught me that the strongest light does not come from the outside, but from within. And I, at last, had turned mine on. Today I look in the mirror, and I no longer see the broken woman who felt excluded from a party. I see a woman who learned to love herself, who got up off the floor, who turned her pain into strength. A woman who, in her 60s, understood that life does not end as long as you have the courage to start over. That is my dawn. To live free, respected, and dignified. And even if I end up alone, I prefer that luminous solitude to company that darkens my world. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what part resonated with you the most. Do not forget to leave a rating for this story because your words help me continue to share more tales like this one. And above all, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you do not miss any of these emotional and surprising stories that always have something to teach us.